Hi, and welcome to the Chasing Care podcast. On today's episode, I'm delighted to say that we have Hannah Karim from Lottie, and we'll be talking about not leaving decisions for your personal care until it's too late. So before we get going, welcome, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
We're going to talk about leaving decisions too late, as I said, but I'm interested to find out first about who you are and where your experience lies in terms of the care sector, and what do Lottie do?
Absolutely. So I'm the customer care lead here at Lottie.org. So we support families and retirees who are trying to navigate their elder care and later living search. Typically, that might be home care, care homes, retirement living, but we're on hand to support them through what can be such a minefield of a journey.
Well, that's the truth. And I understand from the website, it says it's a free service that helps families and retirees find the UK's best care home care and retirement living. How does that work?
Yeah, so everyone always thinks is that it's too good to be true. What's the catch? Our founder Will was adamant that from the conception of Lottie that the cost would never sit with a family who are dealing with a lot of emotional strain and also a lot of financial strain as well. So yeah, we offer a completely free service to the family or the individual themselves, and we have partnerships with different care providers that they will pay us for a referral should a family want to move in or start booking care with them.
Okay. And I'm guessing it's more than just a directory. Would that be true?
Absolutely. So I guess on the face of it, we're a marketplace where you can compare different care providers, and our MO is to offer transparency and all of the relevant information. It's unfortunately not commonplace that you can see live bed availability. If you imagine ever going on holiday and you want to go to, we were talking about Albania before the recording today, Gavin, say you wanted to book your hotel in Albania and you had to call 3 separate hotels and all on different websites, and you had no idea what their price was or what their availability was. That's kind of where the care sector has been up until very recently. So we're trying to empower families to have all of their information in one place. And then also we offer a completely free service to families. So that's my team of care experts that offer a one-to-one human service to kind of hold people's hands if that is something that they need and ask any questions that they might have along the way as well.
Wow. And there's not many organizations like you around, but there are one or two, aren't there?
There are one or two in this space, yeah.
All right. So before we crack on, let me just throw out a few bits of information for the listener about aging population, because I always find these things a little bit fascinating, and that sort of builds a foundation as to why it's so important that we talk about making decisions early, in my opinion. So there are statistics out there that says that there are over 22 million people over the age of 50 in the UK. But the remarkable thing is that that is set to grow by over 19%, so nearly 20% by 2044. That means there's going to be an additional 4.3 million people over the age of 50 in the next 20 years. But at the moment, we have unmet need, particularly for those individuals that are over the age of 65. So just throw a few out there for people to hang their hat on. One of them is there's 1.1 million people that have difficulty dressing. There's 500,000 people that have difficulty walking across their living room. 640,000 older people have difficulty bathing. 140,000 people have difficulty eating. 600,000 of older people have difficulty getting in and out of bed. 440,000 of older people have difficulty going to the toilet. To me, it's really sad. Therefore, there's an absolute urgent need for us to help as many people as possible get that care and support that they need. Sadly, of course, families do tend to leave it a little late. And we are here today to try and help them navigate a little bit further down the road in terms of making a good decision early. So from your experience at Lottie, as a care directory, as a library of information for people that might be needing care, why should they be looking for that care early, in your opinion?
Well, I suppose those stats have given me a good foundation. I think when you think about all of those statistics that you've just read out, Gavin, they are daily activities that you and I are fortunate to not even think about when we do them. We speak to so many retirees themselves or family members who are, there's a huge emotional aspect to it. I have personal experience of caregiving for my mum. We might talk about that a little bit more later on in the episode, but what really stood out to me during that time was my mum was a very proud woman. And I know that there are so many people, maybe of a certain generation, but just across society, who don't want to admit that they can't do those daily activities anymore independently. And the sheer thought of allowing somebody else to support them with that, they would rather just struggle or they'd rather just go without. But I think when you open up the care search to far beyond that emergency point of, someone's had a fall or they've gone into hospital because they've had a stroke or a heart attack or whatever it might be, people tend to make decisions and make plans at that point because they have no other choice. They are forced. They think, well, my loved one actually just can't get by now on their own. But there's so many people, like you say, living in this discomfort and living without being able to eat 3 meals properly a day or comfortably and safely get around their home. So if we bring the care search to much sooner and a more proactive approach and thinking, okay, how can I help my loved one feel more independent and not stay inside all the time because they're so scared to go out because of their mobility, or they don't want to put any of their kind of family and loved ones out by, burdening them with asking them. So they just go without. And you're right. It's so sad. It's a sad picture. And we are adamant at Lottie. We are our mission is to elevate later living for everyone. And we truly mean that. It should be a period of life where you're still able to go out and you're still able to explore and enjoy things and create memories with your loved ones. And there's care solutions available that can allow you to do that, and in a way that you still maintain your dignity and you maintain your independence as well.
You mentioned your own personal circumstances, so I think that might be helpful for the listener if if you don't mind talking about that today, because it might just paint a picture as to what's, let's call it, normal in society at the moment in terms of that decision making. So if you're happy to, would you mind just painting the picture for the listener as to what you experienced?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I definitely experienced that emergency situation where the rug gets pulled out from underneath you. I was 22 years old. I just started a full-time job after graduating university, and I'd moved back home. So I was living with my parents at the time. And you got that call that no one ever wants to get. And my mum had a stroke. She was at home. We were meant to be going to the shopping later that afternoon, and she wasn't picking up the phone. And then I picked up the phone and I was getting really disjointed communication from her. And I'm thinking, oh, that's a bad phone line. And it wasn't. She'd had a stroke. Fast forward, she's in a high dependency stroke unit for 2 weeks. She doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know who she is. Truly the unthinkable. And no one had prepared for that moment. How can you prepare for that moment? Especially when you're 22 years old and all you're really thinking about is, oh, I'm getting paid. I'm not a poor student anymore. I can go and enjoy my weekends with my friends with a bit of money. Yeah, your priorities are absolutely put in check. And I often talk about individuals who don't realize that they've taken on the responsibility of being a caregiver. And that was absolutely me. I didn't even think about what I was doing. I just knew that my mum wasn't able to support herself anymore. And so I'm going to step in and do that. And I didn't look like what people would imagine a carer to be, 22 years old. I think people have this picture that they're middle-aged, they've got parents in their 80s and 90s, and that just wasn't the case for me. So yeah, that first-hand experience really showed me what an emotional impact that can have, what that does to your family dynamics, what that does to your sense of self, finances, practically, how do you juggle a job and care for somebody at the same time? So yeah, a truckload of perspective, and thankfully I'm now kind of, mum's well, and I'm able to help thousands of families who are in their own version of that journey with that first-hand experience of knowing what that can really feel like.
Yeah, I'm trying to break this down a little bit in my mind. It seems to me from many years that I've been talking to people in the care sector is that there's a definitely clarity in people's minds that the NHS is there for you. It's there for the whole of your life. If you've got a problem, you can go to A&E, and looking at more statistics, I won't go into too many, but the older you get, the more likely you are to end up in A&E. But it's there for you. You know where to go. You phone 999 and an ambulance tends to, well, eventually turns up in this day and age. But you have a certain degree of probability that you'll be well looked after in hospital. No doubt about it. But it's when you come out, isn't it? You say your mum was in hospital. So where did you go next? How did you know how to navigate finding care for your mum?
Well, I think I experienced what so many families experience, which is you kind of just go through the motions and you don't really know what's being put in place. I remember when mum was discharged, she was discharged with a reablement package, which in layman's terms is a degree of outpatient care where we were getting visiting carers come to the home and making sure, mum was safe and well and receiving the support that she needed. And that happens for up to, 6 weeks, depending on what an individual needs. I think mum received about 2 weeks of it. And weirdly, I remember thinking, because I'd taken on quite a lot of that responsibility of caring for mum, I could kind of allow outpatient carers to sign mum off. She's safe and well and she's got family that are able to support her, which in loads of ways is great. And I know my mum would much rather that I cared for her. But you think of all the individuals that don't have that, first of all, and they entirely rely on what's being provided by the NHS or the local authority. But also, my life completely was put on hold. And I think, a lot of people talk about unpaid carers, the sheer amount of unpaid carers across the country who are kind of shouldering this responsibility, because I'm the millionth person to say that social services and the NHS are stretched. So you've got all these unpaid carers like stepping in to keep vulnerable people safe and well. And to answer your question on where did we go next, mum was fortunate that she made quite a good recovery and we didn't need to access additional at-home care or additional social care for her. We kind of divided that amongst the family. But if I imagine back then, and I know I'm biased, but if I imagine back then and someone had given me a number for any service that could have supported me, whether that's a carer's helpline, whether that's someone just talking to me about my experience of it and the effect that that's having on me, or whether it is someone that can come and offer that practical support and take some of that burden away, it would have been life-changing. But I didn't have that at the time, and so you just kind of muddle through it. And
sounds quite a traumatic experience. And you know what? The part of the reason we started the Chasing Care podcast was to try and create knowledge, advice, guidance, support, direction, call it what you will, for people who are in the general public who just have no idea. And it's quite interesting. I do find these things fascinating. You said that your mum wanted you to look after her, which I think is commendable, I'm sure. But statistically, when you get older, the elderly don't actually want their family members to look after them, because I guess they probably feel they're going to be, I don't know, told what to do rather than cared for the way that they feel that they want to be cared for, which is where the professional can step in, obviously, with a care plan which suits everybody. So there's that one comment. The other thing is absolutely right. Unpaid carers, that's people that are not seeking external support and maybe just surviving on a few handouts from the local authority to help fund some of the care support. But it's such a difficult area, because there's, like they say, there's 5 million unpaid carers, but the number could be 10 million unpaid carers. It's a massive amount. And probably these people, we've talked about it before in another episode, probably they're unpaid carers and doing what they do because they don't know what else they could do, because they don't know where else to go to try and get support. Maybe they're in low earning families as well. And with the local authorities at the moment, with so much outstanding unmet need by a local authority, it must be all very frustrating. And I don't really want today to dwell on too much frustration. What I'd like to do is try and understand what we could do better. So from your experience, having talked to families, what are they saying to you? Because I've got in my head what I think they might say after they've spoken or enjoyed the experience of a Lottie contact. But what do they say to you? I'm just jumping into this episode, which I hope you're enjoying, to ask for a favour. It's really important to us to get likes, shares, following and comments about the Chasing Care podcast in order to build the audience. So if you know anybody that's in the care sector or thinking about care for a family member, maybe you could like, recommend and share. Let's get back to the episode.
The vast majority are coming to us in that emergency stage. Or if people are wanting to be more proactive about the journey, then typically they've got at least one family member that's not bought into the idea of external support, whether that's the individual that would be receiving it themselves. They're being very stoic and they're very reluctant to accept the help. I don't need help, I'm fine. Very, very common. And I think for a lot of those individuals, in the way that we try and support the beginning of that journey for them is to try and debunk some of the stereotypes of care. We've all seen the horror stories of things that have happened in care homes or with home carers. And that's terrifying. It's truly terrifying. And if someone that is losing their independence sees a story like that, I'm not surprised they're going to be reluctant to accept care. But trying to support families by educating them on the CQC, for example, and encouraging them to kind of make that process. If they're looking at care homes, for example, you don't have to book a big day of 4 back-to-back care home tours where you just do the loop and you see the showroom and you don't know what questions to ask. You can give people a bit more control over of how that goes. Is that, if mum's really interested in gardening, is it finding if they've got a gardening club on that she can go and take part in to get a real feel for what the home would be like? We provide families with viewing guides. What are some questions that they might want to ask on those visits to really get the most out of them? Because they can be so overwhelming. And for a lot of people, that's the first time they've stepped into a care home environment. And the stakes are really high. So that's even added pressure. So I think, part of it is debunking stereotypes and trying to gently encourage individuals to at least consider those options, those care solutions. We've got so many families that come to us every single day worried about money. Care is so expensive. There's no two ways about it. There's another statistic for you, but £3.5 billion worth of funding goes unclaimed in England and Wales each year. And I truly believe that that number is so big because individuals just don't know what's available to them. Or if they do, then they don't know how to go about applying for it. Or if anyone listening has ever tried to apply for government funding, they don't make it easy. I sat down with my mum to do the attendance allowance form, and it's a 50-page form. And I know for a fact she would have got it fine, I'll just do without the money. I can't face this 50-page form. But we sat down and we did it. And so a large part of our service at Lottie as well is breaking down those guides and those different funding types into, step-by-step resources, easy to digest. What's the eligibility? What do you need to, before you sit down with your loved one and fill in that form, you need to get their medications and their GP, all of the information to just try and make it as smooth as possible. So funding is a huge one. Trying to encourage individuals to even consider the options is a huge one. And then also encouraging caregivers to look after themselves. Like I said, lots of the time, those conversations we're having are at that point of crisis. Someone's had a fall, or they've just visited their loved one and the home is in a mess and they're in a mess and they've not eaten, and, some really difficult situations people are living in. And that's a huge burden. I hate the word burden. I hate anyone to ever feel like they're burdening you, but it's a huge undertaking for the family members to go through that as well. And so it's reminding individuals that it's not just the individual that needs care, that needs to be looked after, but it's also, it's you, and recognizing quite how much you're taking on emotionally and practically.
Wow. I mean, it's just wow, isn't it, really? Because there are just so many layers. I had about 50 different questions while you were talking then, Hannah, to be honest with you. Because it's this crisis purchase, we should really be trying to allay people's fears well before the crisis occurs. And that sort of comes back to where we started in terms of don't leave your decision too late. But it sounds to me, sadly, I lost my parents when they were very young, so I haven't personally had the need to think about my elderly parents. But if you don't talk to mum or dad about their future and what they would like, then it's going to become a problem later, isn't it? What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, these aren't conversations anybody wants to have. No one wants to talk about when they get older and they don't have their independence, or even thinking about what's going to happen if they lose their capacity or when they pass away. That's not what anyone wants to talk about at the dinner table. But they're such important conversations to have. And even myself, who's worked in this industry, I still find it hard to navigate those conversations with my own parents. And I've got the knowledge of, I know the facts. I know how to access power of attorney. I know the importance of my parents having their power of attorney set up. I should probably have power of attorney. I should probably have a will, but I don't. And so I'm living proof of you can have all of the knowledge, but there's this taboo and there's this stickiness. They're really difficult conversations to have. And there's a lot to be said for when you're not, dealing with it firsthand and it's not your own loved ones, that it's much easier to support someone else navigate it.
Well, I'm going to set you a challenge here, Hannah. You've just told me two things that you should be doing, but you're not. And if you're not doing it, why would the listener do it? So one, I want you to speak to your mum about power of attorney for the future. And we'll talk about that in a second. But also, what was the other thing? You haven't got
I haven't got a will. Mum's not
got a will. That was the other one. Yeah. I bet you haven't got a pension either. But let's forget about that one. But no, so go write a will and go and speak to your mum about power of attorney. Now, let's just dwell on that, because that actually is a very, very important subject, which has been spoken about in this podcast, but it's always good to review these thoughts. Tell the folk out there, why should they think about a power of attorney? What does that mean in reality?
So essentially, a power of attorney is power of attorneys. It can be multiple people. It's the individual or the individuals that you assign to make decisions, important decisions on your behalf if you lose mental capacity. And they're matters relating to either finance and property or health and welfare. You can have the same attorney for both. You can have different attorneys for either. There's kind of different ways of setting it up. And I have supported hundreds of families who have unfortunately found themselves in a situation where their loved one hasn't assigned a power of attorney and their loved one has lost mental capacity. And that puts individuals and families in a really difficult position where they are relying on adult social services, and they have to go through so many processes and join so many queues whilst they're seeing their loved one struggle. And it's not even just the logistics side of it, but you touched on it earlier. It's giving that person the agency to be able to decide what they want from their future. They can actually choose their nearest and dearest. They can choose their partner, their children, whoever they want it to be, a friend who they trust and knows them personally to make those decisions in the future. And they're not another person that's being cared for by the state. And to make it super clear, you cannot assign a power of attorney if you have already lost mental capacity. It has to all be prepared beforehand, and we never know what our future holds. Like I said, when I was 22 years old, that morning before I went out shopping with my mum and I had no idea what that afternoon, that life-changing event that was going to happen. None of us know. So it's truly so, so important. My mum, I have spoken to her about it before, and we didn't quite get there, but she said, "Well, I don't need one of those because I've got my marbles."
No, I might be joking with you a little bit, but I'm also rather serious about everybody needs to take that step. You've just reminded me that I need to speak to my son and tell him that I need to talk to him, because he's not going to likely talk to me about it. But it's like a will as well, isn't it? If you don't actually have a will, then the government's in control of your money. Nobody else is. It's not about your siblings. There's no such thing as the siblings automatically getting access to your money. It's the government's money. So sort your will out as well. It's really important. But the power of attorney is just so fundamental, because, as you quite rightly said, you lose capacity. You cannot assign anything to anybody if you haven't got capacity, and that will be judged by somebody else. So you're best to get that up front. Really, just get it done. All of us. Let's have that awkward conversation with mum, dad, or any other family member that you feel might not have somebody that could be responsible on their behalf if they lost capacity. It's just so critically important. And you mentioned that there's, what was it, 3.5 billion of money that hasn't been claimed. It sort of brings me back to another conversation I had, which was when I was 50. Don't ask me how long ago that was, but when I was 50, I got loads of mail from lots of people, including Saga Holidays, saying I can go on their holidays. But I don't think I've had anything from anybody saying that I can claim for anything. Not that I probably can, I don't know. So why is that? Why is that, Hannah? Why isn't anybody wanting to tell me that I'm allowed to claim money?
I can only imagine that if everybody claimed what they were entitled to, some of those benefits would probably disappear quite quickly. I don't think we can afford for everyone to be receiving the financial support that they're entitled to, which is just so broken, right? But it's created this need to take accountability for it yourself. And it's hard because a lot of the individuals that are entitled to the benefits are vulnerable. So it's putting that ownership on them and their loved ones, that they have to be proactive in educating themselves on what they're entitled to. I think that's the situation we're living in.
I mean, in some ways, thank God we've got the internet, so it's probably a little bit more accessible. But back in the day, before people were internet savvy, that must have been an absolute nightmare for people. But the aging population, a growing population, I touched on those numbers earlier. It doesn't make it any easier for people necessarily to get the money they're entitled to, particularly if the system is so cluttered with outstanding decisions by governments.
Absolutely. You mentioned about the aging population there, and the ONS has actually predicted that there will be more individuals just by 2025, right around the corner. There'll be more individuals of a working age that have an elderly dependent than a child dependent, which makes you think, as a society, we've not got it perfect, but we have a lot more infrastructure to support parents than we do those that have an elderly dependent. And that's within the workplace, that's outside of the workplace. So you kind of, when you hear statistics like the many statistics that we've shared in this conversation, you start to realize, well, the likelihood of me having to go on a version of an elder care journey at some point is extremely high, and it's only getting higher.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day about the sandwich generation. I didn't know what that was until that was explained to me, but I clearly understand it now. For those that don't know, it's not about a subway. It's about having elderly parents at one end of your life and young children at the other end, and you're trying to balance that all together and probably working at the same time. So it's extremely difficult. And let me just ask a question again here. Uh, because I think that maybe people think that care often is black and white in terms of, oh, mum, dad needs to go into a care home, that critical purchase. Whereas what we're not really identifying, which maybe you can clarify, is that there's many layers of care. There's many different forms of care that are available to people. And you mentioned about respite care and all kinds of things. Just paint the pictures to the many sort of things that people could potentially access in order to support an elderly relative.
Yeah, so if we imagine it as a timeline, and it's not a lovely, neat, step-by-step process, but just for the sake of explaining it, if we imagine an individual that is living at home, very common situation, they're living in a 2-story house where their washing facilities are upstairs, and they may not even be living with any degenerative conditions. They're just getting older. So getting up and down the stairs is getting harder. It's becoming less safe. So for those individuals, they may not, well, they're definitely not really going to be considering a care home. They're probably also not going to be thinking about having a carer come into their home to support them, because they're for the most part very independent. But for those individuals, they can be accessing support from the government to make their home more accessible for them as their needs are starting to change and evolve, so that they can safely get up to bed, safely get up to their washing facilities. You can access up to £1,000 of home adaptations and equipment from your local council, regardless of your financial situation. And whenever I share that with families, they're like, really? But mum owns her house and mum has X amount in savings. I'm like, yeah, it's regardless of that. She can get a stair lift, she can get grab rails. There's also more major adaptations that can be made to the home that are means tested, whether it's somebody that maybe is now needing to get around in a wheelchair and it's widening the door frames within their home, or it's lowering the counters in their kitchen. There's also a very large number of individuals that live alone. They're in the elderly population and they live alone. And we talk a lot about social interaction and the importance of companionship and trying to ensure that these individuals aren't going days and weeks without speaking to somebody. And we talk a lot about companionship care. And all of our home care partner providers offer a companionship care service. And some of the individuals on my team who before their life at Lottie were home carers themselves, and they share some great stories. They're some of my favorite stories where they used to go and visit individuals in the area. And there was one lady who she visited, and they sit down and they'd duet Frank Sinatra together because it was a companionship visit. And that was the highlight of her week. And another, she'd sit down and watch Coronation Street together, you know? And I think those right at the beginning of that timeline of care, if we imagine at the very end of it, it's very complex, round the clock, one-to-one support. And we zoom it all the way up to companionship care. We allow individuals to live far more fulfilled and comfortable and safe lives by acknowledging all of that, these home adaptations, the equipment, the companionship care. And then incrementally building on that, maybe that's that your loved one isn't eating 3 meals a day, or they're forgetting to take their medication, or they want to go down to the local park, but they want someone to put their arm on and walk along with them. And those are all things that a carer can provide. And once you then have that relationship with a carer that you like and trust and knows you, if later down the line you need more involved support for whatever reason might happen, you have that relationship there. And that's an amazing and valuable thing. It's not someone that, you've had a fall or you've gone in for an operation or whatever it might be that happens, and then a stranger's suddenly at the door. You can build that relationship from the beginning.
Yeah, I get that. And it's important to understand, unfortunately, that there is a cost associated with these private care providers, but your local authority isn't necessarily going to be in the position to deliver that unless you might fall into their category of needing support, but rarely is that the case. But the companionship thing is a massive need, particularly for families where the loved ones are not living round the corner. And we're getting a lot of that these days, aren't we, where mum or dad might be 2 or 3 hours away. And it might be that employing somebody to pop round an hour a fortnight, that might just be all it is. And the care industry can actually deliver that for you. So it's worthwhile exploring that over time and developing that relationship with care providers, or probably Hannah would say with Lottie, but it doesn't matter who. But as long as you're reaching out to the sector for the people that understand what good looks like in the sector, so your loved one is actually being looked after. Because it must be so frustrating for some families that don't know what to do. And it really is helpful, this sort of conversation, to understand that it can be done in stages. I like that a lot. So thanks for outlining that for us. In terms of getting a little bit more advice, I know there are other organisations, and I'm not bigging up Lottie necessarily, but could you just refresh me, please? If somebody called Lottie tomorrow because they were unsure what they were entitled to, what care provision they could be looking for, who they should be speaking to about getting some kind of financial support, what do they do with Lottie? Is this something that you do for people that are calling you?
Absolutely. So first of all, they can either access their own support through the marketplace, or if they do want to speak to a human, which I always do, then they can call my team. They can access the hotline service or email us through the contact form, and you will be given a care expert who will then be there to support you with whatever it is that you need. So that relationship tends to start with a consultation call where your care expert finds out exactly what your situation is. It's very different for everyone, whether it is that you downloaded the attendance allowance form and you absolutely just don't know where to start. Your care expert can walk you through it and provide some of those digestible resources that we've created. perhaps you're worried about your loved one who is maybe socially isolated and you want to understand what the options are there, or you're in that emergency situation, whatever it might be, we've tried to build as a comprehensive and wide reaching service as possible. And I am very confident that my care experts would never leave someone without an option. And we've been known to go, above and beyond, finding dog walkers and boilers and Fiat 500s, whatever it is, we'll do it. So yeah, that's absolutely something that we support with. And we just want to make sure that someone feels empowered and is able to make an informed decision because they have those menu of options in front of them, and they understand what they all really mean.
And can I just clarify something else? This is something that I get asked on a regular basis. People get confused between care providers and introduction agencies when it comes to care. Lottie is what when we look at the bigger picture? What's Lottie compared to a care provider and an introduction agency? Can you clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, definitely. So we partner with care providers. So we don't have a bank of carers on our books. We don't own care homes or retirement living properties, but we partner with a verified portfolio of those across the UK. And verified portfolio essentially means that we don't partner with all of the providers in a geographical area. They have to offer a certain standard of care so that we can confidently recommend those to families. But we are introducing you to care providers that match what you're looking for yourself or your loved one based on facilities, prices, availability, type of care.
And does that mean to say that you're introducing CQC regulated care businesses that manage this full service, as opposed to there are other brands out there that say that they are representing carers, but then they're only an introduction agency that they don't actually do a lot of management, or, well, they introduce individuals who are carers. Is this a different model? Can I just clarify that, please?
Yeah, so that's a different model. So we're not direct to carer today, although we do see a lot of families wanting to access individual carers.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's something we look at in the future, but today our offering is introducing you to care providers who manage their own care services. So as you say, they're CQC regulated. Retirement living isn't, they don't come under CQC, but our home care and care home providers are CQC regulated. And that is part of what we take into consideration when partnering with a provider.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. And I've got another question. I've got lots of little questions jumping into my head all the time, Hannah, and it's very difficult to try and pull one out. But can I just ask this next one, please? What are the different types of care that people might consider? I know of care homes. What else is there?
So I guess to simply put it, or at least in my eyes, home care and care homes are like your two main umbrella terms. And then within home care, you can access visiting care. So a carer coming for an hour a fortnight, 3 times a day, or whichever. Live-in care, individuals moving into your loved one's home on either an ongoing or fixed term basis. There's overnight carers. Perhaps your loved one's care needs mean that they're particularly vulnerable at night time, so you can have a carer come and support them. There's waking care or there's sleeping care. So based on whether you need your carer to be awake or not. And then in terms of care homes, you can receive respite care. So you're there for a fixed term, whether that's because your carer's going away or you want to try out respite before you move into a care home permanently. There's a few different reasons why someone might be in respite care, or you can be there as a permanent resident. And within the care home environment, depending on the type of care support that you require, you may live in the residential community, so that individuals with fairly low care needs, or the nursing community where you need the support of registered nurses, and then the dementia community. And that will look very different depending on each care home. Sometimes their communities are mixed. Sometimes there's secure dementia environments for individuals that are prone to wandering. It's really based on understanding what your loved one's care needs are and what care solution is best suited to them in terms of their care needs, but also their wants, their desires, their budget, whether they want to stay at home, whether they can safely stay at home, or whether the purpose-built environment of a care home is best for them.
And you did mention something else. You mentioned retirement living. What's that?
So retirement living it's a growing trend in the UK. There's not as many here as there are in the likes of Australia, where it's very commonplace for individuals of a certain age to move into a retirement community. But they are purpose-built environments where we spoke about kind of the accessibility for individuals living in a 2-story home. In retirement properties, they are purpose-built with those kind of accessibility adaptations in mind. So they're typically flats, or you may have bungalows and some houses as well, where an individual over state pension age, or some of them have minimum ages of 55, 60, and they live alongside other individuals of a similar age, and they're not necessarily receiving care within that property, but they are able to live more safely and more independently, and kind of downsizing into an environment that's maybe better for them and having that sense of community around them as well. And there's a difference then as well between villages and communities, and it kind of the setup of what the properties look like.
So here we go again, Hannah. Building in layers of complexity and lack of clarity as to what's what and where's where. Oh my God. Look, we're getting almost to the end of today. It's been thoroughly enjoyable, but I've got one more question. If anybody listening today is what I would call care curious, a bit like sober curious, but care curious, would be the top piece of advice that you would give them right now?
It's a big question, Gavin.
We're here to answer the big question.
Big questions. My top piece of advice would be, and it's one I need to heed myself, to have those difficult conversations with your loved ones, because the alternative of leaving that to the last minute is far more uncomfortable than it is to have that today, this week, next week.
Love that. Love that. Thank you for sharing. And Hannah, it's been amazing. You've been a great guest. Thanks for your time today. In closing, if anybody wanted to reach out to Lottie or to you, how do they find you?
They can go to lottie.org, and then you can go to the contact page and reach out to myself, the care experts, and the rest of the team.
Thanks. And thank you, everybody who's been listening today. You've been listening to the Chasing Care podcast. I'm Gavin Chase. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. But for today, Hannah, it's been amazing. And thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.